Hey everybody, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com, and today's video is coming off the heels of my last one where I did a review and audio examples of the new UAD Neve 1084 EQ and Preamp plugin, and I thought I'd stack this one up against one that came out relatively recently that's also a 1084 emulation, and that is the Lindell plugin's 80 series through Plugin Alliance. The 80 series does have some features that the UAD does not. The UAD is just the preamp and EQ section. The Lindell plugin has the dynamic section with a compressor and gate and some of the other Brainworks Plugin Alliance goodies like tolerance modeling technology, TMT, some THD control for extra preamp saturation here. But I'm not going to do any of that stuff. I'm going to leave that out. And I'm just going to focus on the preamp versus preamp, the famous red knob Neve preamp, and the EQ versus EQ. You want to make sure if you have the Lindell, you have this 84 button engaged. If you don't, it's a 1073. If you do, it's got the 1084 options. So the very first source we're going to hear it on, just like in the other video, is kick drum. Here's the dry kick drum source. Here is the UAD processed version. And the Neve Lindell version with very similar settings to the UAD. I'll just toggle them back and forth now. I'm going to gain stage the Lindell a little bit hotter. I couldn't use the exact same settings on both because the Lindell does have a little bit different reaction from the preamp section than the UAD, but they're in the same ballpark. If I jump over to the analyzer here, you see why you might hear some differences between the two. This is the exact same boost on the exact same frequency, 60 Hertz, from both plugins. I'm matching settings between the UAD and the Lindell. First, you see the UAD, which is the pink line right here. And then you see the Lindell right here. The reason the Lindell has two little lines near each other, that's the tolerance modeling technology where the left and right channels are slightly different from one another. So that's why even with the same settings, you might get a little bit different result between the two. Also keep in mind that if you had two hardware 1084s, you might get similar results to this. They're not all going to be exactly the same. There's going to be some discrepancies based upon the tolerances of each unit, how well they're taken care of, how old they are, and so on. So this isn't really that far off in my opinion. Now let's move on to snare drum next, and we'll do the same thing. We'll start with the unprocessed snare drum first, and then go on to some of the processing. Unprocessed snare drum here. With the UAD processing. And now with the Lindell. And now we'll just jump back and forth between the two of them, starting with UAD. For the next example, I wanted to take a bass part, a bass guitar part, and really push it hard through the preamp, not even really use the equalizer at all, but just hear how that preamp saturation works when you move this red preamp knob over into the mic side, which is kind of like pushing a line level signal hard through the mic side, get some extra distortion to hear how they saturate, because they do saturate differently. I did notice that. So here we go. First, the plain bass guitar part. You get the idea. Here it is with the UAD saturation through the preamp. And the Lindell. And now we will just jump back and forth between the two of them, starting with the UAD and then the Lindell. do saturate very differently. I also had to push the Lindell a lot harder to get the same level of saturation and distortion that I got with the UAD version. You can see that I'm pushing the Lindell into past the -50 mark. The UAD is just before the -40 marking over here. I don't know if that has to do with the fact that the Lindell has continuous controls and the UAD is the original sort of stepped controls, if that's a difference there, but the preamps definitely have a different breakup to them, different character to the breakup. Next, we're going to move on to a guitar part, and we're going to start with a plain guitar by itself without any processing. Here it is. Here's the UAD processing. And the Lindell. And again, we'll jump back and forth between the two, starting with UAD. The upper mid-range in that one, I can tell, has a little bit different character between the UAD and the Lindell. And the final source we will hear it on is lead vocals. Here is the lead vocal part without any processing.
Band through my hand.
With the UAD processing.
Band through my hand.
And the Lindell.
Band through my hand.
And we'll go back and forth between the two of them again. I'm going to let the phrase run a little bit longer. We're going to start with the UAD first.
Band through my hands. If only I had listened or been a better man, I wouldn't feel you slipping through my hands. And I thought it would stop if I bled out all the blood I've got.
So there they are. You've got the new UAD Neve 1084 EQ and Preamp stacked up against one that's been out for a little while, and that is the Lindell 80 series channel, both based on Neve 1084 EQ sections. The Lindell does have a few extra features, as I mentioned before. Let me know what you think down in the comment sections below. Which one do you like better? Do you think they're in the same ballpark? How do they stack up against one another? One of the main advantages of the Lindell, of course, is that it runs natively, whereas the UAD does require UAD hardware to run. But again, let me know what you think down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next one.